Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar, How to Become the Pilot Everyone Wants to Employ. I've got Captain Andy Perkins with me today from FlightPad, who will be talking through a few pointers for you over the next 45 minutes or so. And then we'll be moving on to some Q&A session. Throughout the webinar, we want you to engage as much as possible, so please feel free to put anything in the chat box. So I'll be shortly passing over to Andy, but before I do, I just want to make you aware that if you have any problems in terms of connecting or your connection is interrupted, please click on the button at the top and that will reconnect you to the session. And also the chat box is over on the right hand side and you can direct messages either directly and publicly or privately as well. So Andy, over
Thank you very much. It was kind of you to give me a promotion. So yeah, senior first officer, but yeah, no, very fortunate to do lots of different bits of flying and involved in lots of different things. So a big welcome to everyone. If you are able to participate in the chat as we go through, it'd be really good to just try and tailor this to the people that are listening. And obviously, if you're then watching this on a recording, hopefully it will just give you some ideas as well from other people. If we move to the next slide, please. So just a brief introduction as to who I am. I train on the 777, so that's one of my sort of strings to my bow. Spent a lot of time in recruitment over the years for various charitable organisations, mainly the Air League, the British Gliding Association, and then also for British Airways in their recruitment team, and also then helping with the direct entry recruitment requirements for them and for a few others. Avid GA pilot, love gliding and a little bit of light aircraft flying. Just would love to have more time to do all of it. Just being airborne, I know everyone has been, who's an aviator, has been really looking forward to getting back in the skies, and like myself, can't wait. So let's hope that that is possible over the coming weeks, and all of you are able to get airborne. In terms of what we want to do over the sort of next half an hour to 45 minutes, is this isn't about me. I want to really try and help you with your sort of setup and the things that you want to see in terms of how you're going to make sure that you're ready to return either to the flight deck and be the person that everyone wants to employ, but also to give you a few pointers regarding the next steps and being ready and prepared for that next interview, because despite obviously the current downturn, it'd be really good to make sure that you're fully up to speed and ready to go with regard to the next sort of wave of interviews and jobs. So if we could move on, please, Joe. In terms of today then, the emphasis on today, this is the last session and sort of two combined elements, so sort of part 6 and 7, I think it is. And what we're looking at is sort of what you would require in terms of ensuring you're prepared for your next aviation interview. And actually, obviously a lot of these elements, as we know, will be relevant for any job role. So whilst we're waiting for aviation to pick up, we can obviously use these transferable skills in other ways. But what we're going to have a quick look at is we're going to talk about those pilot competencies again, just to make sure that we've got those clear in our mind as the key elements that people are looking for to ensure that you're the pilot that everyone wants to employ. Then we're going to have a little revisit of preparing for selection and what research and what elements you can do to make sure that you are ready and that you're able to put your best foot forward. Making that lasting impression, and we'll talk about the 30 seconds, the crucial 30 seconds. So we'll have a little look at that. And then keeping sharp and making sure that you are ready for the change and opportunities as they arise. So we're going to have a little look at keeping sharp and keeping fresh. So that's our plan today. So I appreciate there's a few of you online there. So if we go on to the next one, I will ask a question to everybody. So just your gut reaction for the people that are online. What do you think are the key skills that you need to be the pilot everyone wants to employ? What do you think? Let's just see what everyone comes up with. What the first thing that comes into your head as to what you need to be that really good pilot. Team player. Yeah, I agree with that one, Joe. I think that's a very important skill. So if we think about that in terms of the competencies that you need, well, actually, that's one of the things that you can practice in many different guises. And one of the things you can do there is make sure that you are ready to give examples of when you've worked well as part of a team. And actually, it's slightly more tricky in the current sort of pandemic. So it's maybe a chance for you to revisit things you've done previously, but also people will be asking, obviously, what you've done in the last 12 months and how you've kept yourself fresh and ready. Well, actually, one of the things you could talk about there is maybe where you've done things either online or with other people to try and help them through the pandemic. There's been a lot of instances of people going out of their way to help in their local community. And I think all of those elements will really help you come across as one of those people that is a really important part of the team. Another one there, attention to detail in terms of the skill sets. Yep, again, I think that's one of those really important things that you need to be on top of, because it means that you're able to make sure that you really put forward the right attitude and approach. One of the things that we're seeing sort of with people whilst they're doing their recurrent training is that obviously people have been flying a lot less in the last 12 months. And unfortunately, if you find yourself out of the job market at the moment, obviously that will be another area where you haven't been able to keep yourself current. Well, one of the things that you can really do to try and keep on top of that is making sure that you try and keep up to date with sort of what is going on in terms of your own sort of flying. So have a think through, do some armchair flying, make sure that any memory drills of the type that you were on previously, that you still keep up to date and keep on top of those. And although I appreciate that motivationally it's really quite difficult to do that, and certainly a lot of people I talk to have found sort of getting the energy and the drive to pick up and continue looking at that stuff is actually really quite difficult at the moment. But if you're able to do that, what it means is that when you come back and you go through a selection process and maybe go into the simulator environment again for any sort of checkout, it just means that you're ahead of the game already, and you will be able to project quite a different persona in terms of the way you handle yourself and the way you operate. So all I'd say is keep on top of those bits with the attention to detail, memory items, thinking through scenarios of what you would do in certain situations on the flight deck if you had any type of non-normal checklist that you needed to complete, or any kind of minor medical emergency, things of that nature. And all of those elements will, again, help you be prepared and ready for any role. Decision-making has been mentioned there. Yep, and again, that's this is a skill that we can continue to develop even when we're away from the flight deck. And what I think the crucial thing to think about there is trying to look at how you're evaluating certain things. And I was always told, be very careful if you bring any of these elements back into the home, because you can wind your family up quite quickly, saying, well, let's just do a T-DODA on that. They say, no, you have done this wrong. I want you to do this. So all I'd say there is try and have a little look at some of the sort of elements that you do. And actually, one of the things that we've all been trained as in the pilot world, certainly, to really sort of break things down and make sure you compare notes and before you make a decision, and just try and think through some of those decision-making tools. T-DODA is one that's often used. BRAN, which is the benefits, risks, alternatives, or do nothing. Plane path people, and on a slightly different scale, it's not necessarily associated with decision making, but thinking of sort of noticing, understand and think ahead, which is much more situational awareness, but actually that all links into that decision making process. So hopefully that gives us a bit of a revisit on pilot competencies that you might actually sort of need to draw upon when you're getting yourself prepared for that next interview. Thank you, Joe. If we could move on. Great. So preparing for selection. So we've just sort of had a bit of a summary there on the pilot competency side, and hopefully that sort of, if you're thinking of other areas that you need to prepare for, if you download the pilot competencies that are sort of published by ICAO, actually that will give you a really good breakdown. If you search ICAO pilot competencies in one of the search engines, and next to that you could write down an example of when you've used that competency and how you've done it well. And if you have joined us on our previous sessions, the development plans that we looked at sort of right at the beginning, if you were to go back and have a look over the last 3 or 4 months of what you've done since we first looked at that development plan, you could compare and then discuss what you've already done and how you've developed that skill set. And I think that's a really important bit. And don't worry, if you haven't already done that bit and this is the first of the webinars that you've seen in this series, it's not a problem. Just get those pilot competencies, write down sort of what the key indicators are and what relates well to you, and just have a look at maybe drawing out some of those elements that you could develop and that you could review. So once we've done that, then we're looking at what have you done in the last 12 months? And that can be quite difficult because actually it's been a very difficult time for a lot of us and probably all of us. And so what I would say there is don't beat yourself up too much in terms of maybe if you think, oh, I haven't really done much in the last 12 months that is sort of noteworthy in terms of either my career or my role sort of going forward. And I think what I try and focus on is how you've coped, and maybe not going into sort of many sort of detailed examples in an interview sort of scenario that are maybe personal, but to maybe look at more at sort of recognition of the fact that it has been a really unsettling 12 months and that actually there's been a lot of stresses and pressures, but how you've coped with that and what sort of things you've done to ensure your well-being and the well-being of those around you. Because I think by putting that across, that actually shows a real human side. It shows a very personal sort of element and the fact that you care. And actually that will be one of the crucial elements that people will be looking for, I think, in selection going forward, is to see how people adapt and how they are able to empathize and actually relate to other people. Because one of the things that really stands out at the moment when we're operating is that whereas as a sort of pilot community had a fairly sort of level playing field in terms of the way people respond and how they do things, one of the things that has really stood out is that everyone has been under quite different stresses. So the normal sort of stresses of life have changed quite markedly, and what this actually allows you to do is to really emphasize the fact that you're able to listen and you're able to understand that people might be in a different place to you. You might think, well, why is that relevant then to the pilot role? And actually, if we then sort of go back to a couple of those pilot competencies, making sure that you're able to understand and recognize changes in your colleague when you're flying in a 2 or 3 sort of member crew is really important. And actually, people being preoccupied, that can give all sorts of issues in terms of us having problems in terms of the way that we do things going forward. So being able to engage and interact with people is really crucial to make sure that you're able to show that you are the right person for that role. Examples. So we talked a little bit there of different bits in terms of examples. I think the main thing there is to write them down, which sounds really obvious. But one of the things that I've certainly found over the years is that everyone goes, "Oh, I've got no good examples," and then you start talking to them, and actually there'll be examples of when they've done things well in the last 2 weeks, and how they've maybe delegated tasks, how they've given feedback to somebody, how they've been able to, interact and engage with other people and communicate effectively. So I think there's lots of different things you can draw on there, and every recruiter is really just looking to get the best out of you. So actually, that's one of the things that you could do, is just write those examples down and try and expand them, and compare notes with people who know you really well. So your friends and family, they will be able to give you examples of when you've led a team, when you've coped in a crisis, when you've dealt with a difficult problem, when you've dealt with complex issues or stressful situations. So all of those things, if you write them down, you'll find that there's probably around about a maximum of sort of 7 or 8 different sort of areas that you would probably need to cover in terms of good examples that you can then draw on when you're questioned in any selection process. Great, thank you, Joe. If we move on to the next one. And right, so in terms of motivation, what sort of things do you think people come up with when they go for an interview? You can see a couple of ideas here. So maybe if you could pop in the chat, what sort of things do you think of in terms of, if someone asks you, why do you want to be a pilot? What sort of things would you put down as your number one reason for being a pilot? So if you could maybe pop a couple of those in the chat, and I'll talk about these 3 here. So motivation is key. So one of the first questions is always going to be sort of either, what have you done in the last 12 months? And also, why do you want to join us? Why do you want to come and fly for XXX? So whoever it is, and a lot of times people go, I love flying, it's just brilliant. Or it's always been my dream. And you go, well, that's great. Actually, the passion for the job, I think that's very true, Nicholas. It's a really keen one. And actually, I think the important bit here is to really grab the attention. So this might be these sort of 3 statements here. That might be what you feel, and sort of to you it makes a lot of sense. You've got to try and describe it, articulate to the interviewer as to why you are. Why is that the case? Because actually that doesn't tell me anything apart from some nice words saying that I've really, really loved this, I've always wanted to do it. Well, you kind of have to describe what it is about the role that makes you the right person. Now, hopefully all of the things we've been discussing over the last few months will give you some really good ideas to draw on there, and allow you to think through your own particular passions and particular desires and reasons for flying that make you sort of really crucial. But I think the bit that has always stood out to me is to really consider things that sort of, I suppose, add extra sort of credence to what you're trying to get across in terms of your motivation. So if someone comes in and say, look, I love flying, I've always wanted to do it. All right, that's great. That's a really good starter. My dream has always been to fly blah, 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 because I really enjoy engaging with people. I love going on worldwide travel. I love the technical side of making sure that I do a job well. And I enjoy those challenge of different sort of situations and making sure that I get best possible outcome for customers. All of these kind of things, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, hang on a sec, this person is going to add value. And that's the bit that you need to really sort of focus on, is how are you going to add value to the company that you're requesting to join for a job? So if you think about that as part of the motivation as to why you want to join, and that will actually help them as well look at you and say, well, actually, this is the person we want because they have the traits, they have the skills, they have the the style that we want that will fit with our brand and our way of doing things. So I think that's one of the things that can really sort of stand out to help you, is making sure that you really define that motivational sort of initial answer. And what I'd say is that is probably one of the things that you can prepare in advance, because you know you're going to be asked, why do you want to do it? And I think that's a really good way of making you stand out compared to others when you first sort of get established. Look, here we go. Right. Thank you, Mike. That's a lovely thing. I have a long-held passion for flying, working part of a diverse team in a challenging but rewarding role. I enjoy the responsibility and also the time-critical airline environment. I mean, brilliant. I mean, isn't that fantastic? So that's what's so good. And I know, Mike, you're really passionate about the industry, and I like the fact that you then keep going into the detail of customer service, and also you demonstrated with regularly flying, keeping the theory going, jumping in the sim every 6 months. I mean, all of those elements are really good. And as you've rightly pointed out there, showing you're a future captain, but you can bring other things to the role. Flying the plane used to be 90% of the job. I'd say it wouldn't quite sort of say it's now 10% of the job, but I'd probably say it's 50% of the role is actually flying the aircraft safely. But the rest of it is actually about all the people that are on it, managing the systems, managing the people, and making sure you have a really good outcome for everybody, as well as adding real value to make sure that people come back again. So exactly right. Thank you, Mike. That's a really useful sort of comment, and great to hear your thoughts there. So I think that's the first sort of question answered. And then, Joe, if we could move to the next slide, please. I think what we want to look at then is those first impressions. So I'm probably a bit too close on the screen. That's me leaning forward too much. But that sort of, I'm going to talk a little bit about that shortly when I talk about posture and pros. So the first 30 seconds, all right, they say the first 30 seconds is critical, and I couldn't agree more. Although recruiters will use a framework, and often they have a lot of methodology, and they use a lot of occupational psychology behind it to verify the process is accurate and to make sure that they really target the way that they ask their questions to get a fair representation of the individual. One of the things that you will get over time, experienced recruiters will make a decision within about 30 seconds. And I would say 85, 90% of the time, that initial gut reaction within the first 30 seconds actually plays out and is correct when we do all the evaluation of people throughout the different elements of an assessment day. And I think that to me just really shouts that you've got to make sure that first 30 seconds really shows you in the best light. So as a result of that all comes down to appearance as well, posture and pros. So sitting upright, making sure your arms aren't folded in front of you, making sure that you're speaking as clearly as you can, and that you take your time in terms of giving the question some thought and then answering effectively. All of those elements can really come across well. And actually, just the introduction, when you first walk in the room, when you get invited in, it's just like it's good morning with a smile and really good eye contact. So all of those initial elements that you'll have heard of before and have used before in terms of body language are really, really crucial. And then the first 30 seconds that you talk, that will be where you're able to really project your type of personality and why that you are the right person. So I think that element there is probably key. When we talk about sort of looks and everything else, the main thing is just to make sure you're well presented. So depending on the role, it might not be a case that you need to turn up with a sort of a suit or a very smart outfit, sort of to make that sort of projection. But it's very rare that people would turn up overdressed to an interview. So all I'd say is do take time, make sure that you have polished your shoes, that you just feel sharp, because actually if you're feeling your best when you walk in, you will actually pass that on to others, and that will, again, really help put you forward. Now, the other bit that once we've done that, so having said that that first 30 seconds is critical, and I'd still stand by that, one of the things that we then see is people maybe not developing that from that initial 30 seconds. So you think, well, okay, so they sort of come in and they're really sort of there, they're really vibrant, but then it maybe sort of ebbs slightly or just stays fairly constant and a bit flat. And then it becomes a bit borderline as to whether other elements sort of bring them through the process. So you think, well, how do I develop those skills? Well, one of the things I would say is practice. So look in the mirror, ask friends and family, log on to Zoom and talk to yourself and record it. Sounds bizarre, but you could do that. You could record it on Zoom. You could then play back to yourself how you look, how you come across, where your eyes are going, how you're engaging. And actually, a lot of these processes will be on virtual platforms. So if you're having to do that, you maybe want to have a look at how it looks in terms of where you're looking at the camera, to try and make sure that it's not too intense, but also it looks as though you're paying attention when they're asking you a question. So there's all of those elements there. Research. One of the key things that then lets people down is if they don't do any research about the company they're going for. Excuse me 1 second, I'm just going to blow my nose. Sorry to have to share that all with you, but that's a much relief for me. So research the company that you're going into. And the reason I say that is people can really come unstuck if they haven't sort of worked out how the company operates, what their key markets are, how many aircraft they've got, whether they were profitable in the last year or what their sort of plans are for the future, how they engage with corporate and social responsibility. So there's so much information usually on everyone's website. And particularly if you're going for a publicly listed company, they're going for interviews, they will publish all of that data because they have to. So therefore, spending the time just trawling through pages of annual reports, you can very quickly pick out some really useful sort of elements about whether they're interested in biofuels, what their sustainability agenda looks like, how they go about making sure that noise and community projects are not affected by the way they operate. All of those elements, if you can do a bit of research about those companies, again, it's something you can talk about and gives them a really good feeling about the fact that, God, this person is really interested in joining our company. So that's sort of one of the other elements I'd look at there. Right, I think we move to the next slide, please, Joe. So yeah, so how do you develop those skills? So I think I've kind of covered some of those elements already. So practicing in the mirror, to me, it always seems very strange, but it's a really good way of you getting up to speed with answering those questions. And then asking family to interview you and to do practice runs, all of those things are really good. And no one has really sort of done much face-to-face time with people over the last 12 months. So therefore, making sure that you are sort of polished in those skills will again make you stand out. Now, the other thing you can do is go and use different sort of opportunities. So any flight simulators, you're obviously very welcome at FlightPad anytime if you wish to come down and have a go. We'll be opening again on the 12th of April. But also attending any of these online sort of seminars and sessions through other sort of affiliates of BASE would be a really good way of getting yourself up and running and able to really practice and develop those skills if sort of on a face-to-face basis. I think also talking to your peer group, most people in aviation have got a really good network of people around them. And I think that we should really try and utilize that because actually they know you really well and they'll be able to give you some real insights as to what you need to do. other things is to look online for some of those sort of assistance with sort of the selection tools. So for aptitude tests, although I'm not a big advocate of over practicing something, because actually a good aptitude test will just give us a sort of a raw data check of you. Some of the skills you can develop are things like mental arithmetic and sort of the critical thinking and verbal reasoning. Now, there's a lot of very good elements online that are free that you can use to practice those. And a lot of the sort of maths sort of apps that are aimed at young children are actually ideal for mental arithmetic. And there's a lot of really good little apps that you could just do a couple of minutes a day, and actually that will help you develop over a few weeks and get you sort of brain training, which was sort of Nintendo Wii sort of territory of sort of a decade or more ago. Those kind of things actually are really useful for developing these sort of skills that will then help you react and do well on any of those aptitude tests. If we can move on to the next one, please, Joe. And in terms of what else you can do, if you haven't got that network, or if you're just trying to think, well, I've done all of those things, what else can I do? There's other organisations out there that do offer some sort of different assistance with freshening up what you do. So developing your skill sets through FlightPad, it's something we're talking to Joe about in terms of teaming up with Base to run a development day to assist you with maybe running through some of the aptitude testing that you would need to undergo, looking at the interview techniques and some of the briefing exercises that you might expect to undergo if you were to go through a selection process. But primarily looking at that as a development tool, not to look at sort of saying this is what you should expect at whichever sort of interview you're going to and coaching you through that. That's not what we're about, but actually more to focus on the pilot competencies and the skills that you've got, and to help signpost how you could develop as an individual to make sure that going forward you're able to sort of better look at your overview in terms of the way you do things, to make sure that you really can develop those skills and make sure that you're a better pilot and a better employee for the future. One of the organisations that for many years has done a sort of a selection day are the air pilots, and they're looking to revamp and relaunch some of their selection setup. That should be coming in the next month or so, and we've been giving them some ideas to help them change some of the things that they've done historically to make sure that they are sort of appropriate and assisting people. And importantly, the element there is that that'll be an impartial and cost-effective solution to help you develop your skills. So it'd be worth just maybe having a look around and seeing what other options are out there. And as I say, one of the things that we're going to launch again through FlightPad once we're open in the middle of April onwards is to have some sort of evenings where people can actually just drop in, have a bit of time in the flight simulator, but actually to have a bit more of a community environment where we can all get together. And obviously anyone on base will be invited to that, and I will talk to Joe in more depth about us doing that together in due course. But that's something to look forward to in the months ahead. And the next slide, please. So that sort of brings us nicely on to what questions you may have. So hopefully that just gives you a bit of a rundown of what you can maybe do to prepare yourself for the next sort of interview or the next selection day, and just a revisit of how to prepare for those elements. And whatever happens, I just wish you all the best for getting yourselves either established in aviation or back into aviation if you've had a bit of time out. And hopefully that gives a few areas that you can focus on to get yourself ready.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andy. That was excellent. I know that there's sometimes a little bit of a lag on the line between when you ask or you say something when people can hear you. So we'll just wait a couple of minutes just in case there are any questions there. But before I do, I just wanted to highlight there's quite a few online events going on at the moment. For instance, I'm thinking like the Royal Aeronautical Society, they're moving to more virtual events during COVID. Right. And they've actually, some of them are very reasonable. You know, if there is a cost associated to it, then they've dropped their prices quite a lot to make things accessible for people. Would that be something that would make an impact in an interview with yourself, Andy, if you were speaking to someone, they said, "Oh, we've been attending these types of virtual events"?
Yeah, I think it's the important thing is making sure that you keep yourself up to speed and relevant. And actually, anything you can do that allows you to engage with the industry and with other aviation professionals, just really enable you to develop that skill set. And it means that you can actually talk with real credibility about things that you've done. And actually, I think that's really important. So yeah, no, I think any of those events can be really helpful and actually give you a different perspective and open up new opportunities.
Yeah, perfect. Good. We've got a question here from Nicholas. He's saying, what ways would you suggest in order to remain current? It's a good question.
So I think, yeah, no problem at all. It's always a tricky one depending on your experience level and what you've done before. So I think in terms of handling skills, one of the things that came out, there was a study done by the US Army actually back in the 90s. And what they looked at there was what sort of skills fade people had if they had previously done something for more than 18 months. And because what they looked at was if you've just had a new skill and you've just developed it, then actually you can lose the sort of the dexterity and the fidelity quite quickly. However, if you've done something for more than 18 months, then it is very much like riding a bike in terms of the actual motor skills that you require. So what we're actually finding is that the majority of commercial pilots are not suffering as much on handling skills as they thought they might. This isn't across the board, but it's sort of the vast majority are finding that actually the handling side is okay. Where people are falling down is because they've not been doing the procedures and scan flows that they once did. Those elements and the memory items and things of that nature, they're taking a lot more effort to sort of remain. And actually, I think that's because it's stored in a different part of the brain in terms of those skills are quite different. I'm definitely not a medic, so I'm not going to go into the medical detail of that, but it's a different part of the brain. And as a result, those skills actually tend to wane quicker than actually the physical motor skills. So in that sense, what would I suggest in order to remain current? I think obviously anything you can do to keep your handling skills up with a little bit of light aircraft flying or simulators is a really good thing to do. And it'll be a lot of fun because that's what we love doing. We love flying. So why not? But if you really want to try and keep yourself up to speed, I would try and make sure any memory items that you once used, that I'd try and refresh those and keep those current. And as we talked about a little bit earlier in the webinar, is to try and focus a little bit on what you would do in different scenarios, because I think that's really crucial, is making sure that you've got a plan for different situations. Because if you're able to draw on and sort of look at, well, if this happened, I would do this, and why would I do that, and project forward all the time, when you actually do get back to the flight deck or you get one of those roles, you will be in a much better place because you'll already be thinking in that mindset. So I think that's probably does that answer the question, Nicholas, in terms of how we can maybe order those things to keep yourself current?
Yeah, that's really helpful.
That's all right.
I think one thing in terms of currency, a lot of companies, when they do start rehiring, they'll look for ratings to be current. And I think that what I've found quite a lot when I work for a flight training company is that people were unaware of the differences between a revalidation and a renewal, and ratings lapse, the implications of that can be costly in order to renew ratings. Do you have anything on that you would suggest to people?
So it's really difficult, because a lot of people say, look, I've got an A320 rating. Should I pay for my LPC so that I can keep the license current and present it forward? Yes, I mean, in an ideal world, you'd always keep those licenses current, because as you rightly mentioned there, Joe, it can get really quite challenging and more costly if you've expired, because you then have to have training before a test, and also the stress of going into a test having not done any flying for a long period can be really quite difficult. So I think what I'd suggest there is that if there's any way of doing any sort of practice before you maybe do an exam, that would be a really sensible thing to do. And if you find yourself looking at the sort of thinking, okay, actually, I haven't got the money for this at the moment, then actually do defer it, but maybe make sure you have a plan of when and how you're going to make sure you keep that sort of license current. And I think what a lot of people are doing at the moment is maybe taking a practice sim session where they run through the detail of what would be involved in an LPC, just so that they're up to speed and they've had a refresh. And then if there's no sort of sign of any jobs, they're saying, right, I'm going to leave it another 6 months, and then I'll revalidate. But it is a very difficult conundrum, and no easy answer, I'm afraid. It has to be an individual's choice. Yeah.
Okay. We've got another question here from Alexander. Yep. To compare how important is that how many flying hours you have to what you present by yourself. I mean, studies, for example, life experience. So I think weighing up, hopefully I've represented your question correctly, but weighing up your flying hours versus your life experience in a selection.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I've always been a big fan of just hearing what the individual has to say in terms of interview. And actually, yeah, if you've got examples from flying sort of experiences, then great. They're a really good way of doing it. But actually, life is quite varied, and I think one thing that the last 12 months has taught all of us that actually there's a lot more outside work, and actually we should value things maybe differently. So I think making sure that you have a sort of a balance between the two is a good thing to do. But actually, I think just put your best thing forward. So hopefully that answers your question, Alexander. And I think the only other bit I could maybe read into that is sort of how many flying hours should you do before sort of turning up. And actually, I think it's always the way. The more experience you've got, the better. Is definitely one way of looking at it. So if you're able to get any part-time flying jobs, even if it's assisting as a second pilot, as a safety sort of pilot for some, that's a good way of making sure that you're able to turn up and say, hey, look, although I haven't flown in the last year, I've actually been in the flight deck and I've been helping doing X, Y, Z. So I've been in and around aviation. And although I've not logged those hours, it's still been relevant experience, and this is what I've learned from it.
Yeah, that's really good.
Great. Well, if there's no other questions, I mean, I just thank you ever so much for all your time, everybody, and for interacting and engaging. I wish, obviously, everyone all the best with their preparations over the coming months to keep themselves current. And if there's anything else that you would like to discuss or you want to know about, obviously Joe can answer and help put you in contact with anybody who's appropriate. But also we're very happy to hear from you and try and help you on your way at hello@flightpad.co.uk.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Andy. Great presentation as always. And yeah, we'll speak to you soon. Take care, everyone. Thanks so much for coming.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.